Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. First of all, I would like to thank my friend Kurt for his kind invitation and for the Tahrir Institute for Middle East Policy for its hospitality. Thank you, Professor, for your kind introduction. The issue of what's termed as illegal immigration is, let me say, a very controversial issue. It depends where you stand, how you look at it. Some people look at it from a security point of view, where borders are the name of the game, how to protect your borders. Others would look at it from a human rights point of view. A third perspective might look at it from an economic point of view, when they see that Europe by 2025 will be needing no less than 110,000 skilled laborers just to keep its current level of productivity, its economy, then there is an economic need there. Europe is shrinking. By the year 2050 will be less 72 million people. Africa is expanding like hell, so there are different perspectives. Let me start by saying first, from a futuristic point of view, demography is going to be the name of the game in the 21st century, whether we like it or not. This is the law of history. When demographic blocks expand and inflate, they move, they don't stay wherever, throughout history. Therefore, the question, how we deal with this influx of human beings coming from the south, based in UN statistics, by the year 2050, no less than 359 million young Africans will be marching north looking for jobs. So the question, what we are doing as a European Union, is the right way? Is it the right policy to contain and stop this flood? Or this policy should be revisited? These are the real questions. To put it more succinctly, three main drivers of history based on their interaction will decide and determine the fate of our humanity in the 21st century. Demography, this eternal alliance, irreversible alliance between capital and technology, which has resulted in what's called the ultra-symbolic economy, where Wall Street is more important than the production of any economy in the world. Traditional economy, which is based on balance of deficits, balance of payments, exports, imports, this is the real economy. The ultra-symbolic economy, which is based on the movement of bonds, shares from different stock markets in the world, today is 13 times the size of the real economy. While in 1976, the real economy was double what's called the virtual economy or the symbolic economy. Most of the economies of the world are moving toward service economies, whether European, whether American, Canadian, Australian, most of the economies are moving toward service economies, where insurance companies, bonds, stock markets are the name of the game because of the immediate and speedy yield of profits in that economy. The name of the game became money creates more money, while in the Industrial Revolution and Industrial Age, money creates production. Why I'm saying this? Because when you have an increase in population and there isn't enough food to meet that increase, then the gap is widening between those who need to eat, those who need to work, and the economy is not satisfying those needs, then the gap is widening. Too many expectations and projections about starvations that might take place after the year 2025. I started by this gloomy note just to say that this is a law of history. There is an influx of human beings coming from the south. Africa by the year 2050 will be exceeding 2 billion people. So for those strategists on the continent, I think it's a time to rethink the whole thing, the whole paradigm of how we should deal with what's termed illegal immigration. Is it illegal immigration? The UN Regional Office on Drugs and Crime say no, it's a transnational organized crime. It's not illegal immigration, where smuggling and trafficking are the name of the game. So there is even a problem in terms of talking about the concept itself, not only how we deal about it. Therefore, we are faced now with thousands and thousands of Africans coming through basically 3 main routes. The first route is the eastern route, starts from Ethiopia, Addis Ababa, Khartoum, and then they move till they arrive Tripoli, and from Tripoli or Sabrata or Zawiya, these are the coastal cities, they start taking the boat going to Europe. Then you have the western route, which starts from Mali through Algeria, going to Ghat, and that route is the least populated, the least intense, the least condensed route, basically because the Algerian authorities require some documents for those Africans to pass through the borders. The most populated route is the central one, which starts from different African capitals. Then they come to Agadez, Niger, from Agadez to Sabha, and then from Sabha, they branch into main routes, one toward Jdabia and the other one, the main one, toward the western side of Libya. I'm saying this because for those Africans, they cannot come from those African capitals and reach Agadez, and then from Agadez till Sabha without the help with those African smugglers in different African capitals. Those are partners of militia leaders in Libya, and those militia leaders are contracted and partners to some European gangs, some European mafia leaders, whether in Italy, whether in Malta, or in other European cities. So it's an international organized crime. It's not just, some people say, well, there are refugees. Yes, there are refugees. And there are migrants. How are you going to look at it? Economically, politically, or from a human rights point of view, from security point of view? I don't think it's a human tragedy as others would point at it. I think it's a very serious political problem, because those immigrants are potential terrorists if they are pushed back. They are desperate, they are looking for a better life, they are either escaping hell back home or looking for a better economic conditions because of their poverty conditions back at home. So they are pushed, they are compelled to leave home. But if they are pushed back, they're going to look for a very extreme measures to retaliate. And unfortunately, probably David Miliband started to scratch this area, that refugees and immigrants are basically should be looked at from a political point of view, not from a human rights point of view, not from a security point of view, because these are potential terrorist networks in the making, unless a better alternative is offered for them. I started by this brief introduction just to pave the way that the issue is so complicated. If we look at the European policy toward what's called the illegal immigration, theoretically speaking, there is a general policy laid down by the European Union. But in reality, there are different European national policies within this frame. And sometimes there are conflicting European policies, where there are some restrictions in the eastern part of Europe, Greece and the Balkan area. Most of the refugees and the immigrants came to Central Europe, to Italy and Malta. When the Spanish signed an agreement with the Moroccans regarding the immigration issue, also those immigrants came to the central part of Europe. Unfortunately, the way the problems looked at today is that Libya became the crux of the matter. Because Libya today is a stateless society where militias are all over the place. And the issue of immigrants and trafficking and smuggling, whatever term you want to use, became an economic profession for those militia leaders. So the problem got worse when some European governments started contracting those militia leaders to keep the immigrants within Libya against their own will. And here I want to point out to something. The European Union and European governments sometimes accuse Libya of not taking care of the human rights of those immigrants on its soil. They forgot, or let me say, they do not differentiate between two concepts in Libya, the concept of authority and the concept of power. There are different authorities in Libya, but those authorities, they don't have the power. A state without power is just an authority. The power for the state is the core of everything. Power means that you have an army, you have a police, you have a judiciary system, and you have money. Those are the four tools for any government that I can say, yes, there is power. Today we have what's called a consensual government, which was imposed by the international community. We have an eastern government in the eastern part of the country, and we have a third government called Salvation Government, but none of these three governments have the power. The power, there is a difference between the real power and the official power. The official power, we have different governments. But the power, the real power is with the militias, those who are holding guns in their hands. They dictate whatever they want. And unfortunately, when I look at different statements by the European Union and by the United Nations, different resolutions by the Security Council, they are talking about the importance of creating a strong government in Libya, a united government in Libya, a government of unity, the territorial integrity and unity of the Libyan soil. That's a good talk for any Libyan. But if you look at the reality of the deeds of most of the European countries, first, European governments deal with municipalities directly without the knowledge of the central government. European governments deal with militia leaders that they contract them and pay them money to keep those immigrants inside Libya. European governments deal with tribal sheikhs, tribal leaders, and they pay them money to take. How on earth can a very strong, united central government be established while you are taking a serious contribution in dismantling the unity of this country. You are doing so, protecting your national interests as a European government. Whatever that European government, I don't want to name names, but in doing so, you are dividing this country. You are weakening the central government, which you claim that you want to strengthen so it can take care of everything. So first, the European Union accused Libya, assuming that there is a state in Libya, that Libya is not doing its job regarding those refugees and those immigrants in Libya. And there is a problem that I have a professor here of international law, he can correct me. I think the whole literature which came out after World War II regarding international relations and international law deals with the state. It doesn't deal with non-state actors. So European governments assumed that there is a state so they can deal with it. But the reality in Libya, there are non-state actors who decide everything, who determine everything. So there is some sort of contradiction here. On the one hand, you deal with Libya and you accuse Libya as if there is a state. And on the other hand, you are taking a serious part in dividing this country and weakening the central government more and more by dealing by those sub-entities inside the country. As I said, tribal leaders, militia leaders, and municipalities. Today, any mayor in any municipality is dealing directly with different European countries. Some of them go to Milano, some go to Rome, some come here to Brussels, and they start even the European Union itself, when they allocate something, they said will go to the municipalities. Okay, fine. You want to provide services at the local level, but why don't you do it through the central government? Give it credit. Make the Libyans feel that there is a central government that has the power to provide, has the power to provide services to its municipal parts inside the country. The real solution to this, first, there is a common interest, whether we like it or not, we Libyans and Europeans, to bring the state back to Libya today, not tomorrow. Because if we don't do this, the problem of illegal immigration, if you like this term, is going to get worse and worse. Bringing the state back is very important. I'm talking about the most immediate short-range solutions. There is a political dialogue going in Libya today, even within this frame of political dialogue sponsored by the United Nations. There is very conflicting, contradicting European positions within this context. You have the French position on one side, and you have the Italian position on the other side. How this is going to help Libya stand again on its own feet, so it can take care not only of its citizens, even of those who are in its own soil. Ladies and gentlemen, during the 90s, Libya was the only country which granted all Africans, sub-Saharan Africans, entry without any visa. So all those media reports that Libyans are killing Africans, they are torturing Africans, this is a politicized statement. Because Libya is in a civil war. Libyans are killing Libyans. There isn't a state there to be held responsible for what's going on. Different tribes are fighting each other. Different militias are fighting each other. Libyans today are fighting each other in the south, with the incursion of some Africans in the south taking part in that fighting. Some from Chad, some opposition groups from the Sudan, and some from Niger. All of them taking part in this fight, and it's a fight between different tribes in Libya in the south. So Libya became a melting pot of violence. Our responsibility, we as Libyans and the European Union, first, and to come to grips with reality as it is, not as we wanted that reality to be. The reality, there is no state, let us bring the state first. And then we can hold that state responsible for what's going on. We can make agreement with that state and how to protect and how to deal, how to manage the issue of immigration. But for the time being, I mean, if there is a state, and that's the biggest evidence, why you are dealing with militia leaders? You yourself, as a European government, admit and recognize that there isn't a state in Libya. Otherwise, you wouldn't have gone to deal with militia leaders, to force those poor Africans to stay in Libya. And then you start talking about human rights. Who forced those Africans to stay in Libya? Strangely enough, rarely if you find any European government which doesn't advise its citizens not to go to Libya. It's a very dangerous place. Civil war, don't go there. But for those Africans, we contract militia leaders to force those Africans to stay inside that hell. I mean, is this a human rights that we talk about? Isn't this a very clear case that should be put in Strasbourg, in the Human Rights Court? There is a professor of law here. Who's the criminal here? Those militia leaders who take money for whatever deeds they do, or those who contracted them to commit those crimes? If I was asked, as the court did in the title of this presentation, I would advise the following. First, there is a short-range proposition. Why don't we establish a European-African military force, a joint force, with the participation of a Libyan military force? Those, we can call them the gatekeepers. The Chadian-Libyan borders, the Sudanese-Libyan borders, and the Mali-Libyan borders, the Algerian-Libyan borders. We have 5 borders. This is an African European force. Why I'm saying this? Because we have eyewitness statements that for this central route coming from Agadez to Sabha, that those Africans are encouraged by the official army of the Niger government. And they were saluted by the French military officers in the military base in the north of Niger. They are encouraged to go to Libya. So if we are really serious about stopping this tragedy, then let us have a very joint or very common military force participated in by Africans, by Libyans, and by Europeans. This number one. Electronically speaking, we can monitor those borders. And I would remind that there was a treaty between Libya and Italy in 2008. There was a treaty. One of the components of that treaty was monitoring those borders. I myself talked to Franco Frattini, the former foreign minister of Italy, and he said, yes, we can do it. We can reactivate that treaty and monitor, electronically, we can monitor those. 3, and most importantly, the real experts of the desert are the Tuareg and the Tabu. During Gaddafi regime, Gaddafi relied heavily on the Tuareg to stop illegal immigration. Why don't we reactivate this force? There's a force called the Maghawir from the Tuareg. They are very professional. They know every single drop of sand in that desert. And they can monitor it and they can control it. Now, this is a serious thing. This at the protection level. Most importantly, we can start a very strategic solution. And I remember in 2009, I was discussing this solution with Lady Ashton in this very city, 2009. The idea was based on the concept of marriage between capital and technology. We studied the futuristic economic needs of the European economy till the year 2035. And we managed to break down those needs into skills and knowledge in terms of skilled laborers, skilled workers. We suggested that we can start a huge hubs, either in some African capitals or in the south of Libya, where we can do what's called transformational training, recycle those African human beings, acquire them the necessary skills and knowledge needed for the European economy till the year 2035. The Europeans don't want the Africans because they are not skilled. They are liability. Or maybe they are afraid for security reasons. They are afraid for the demographic structure of the society, whatever the reason. But for the time being, whether we like it or not, the fact is that the European economy needs skilled laborers to continue functioning. We can have this very cheap skilled labor through this transformational training approach. We can have a twinning between European universities and Libyan soil, where all those Africans who want to study in Europe, they can study in European universities on Libyan soil. We can have medical twinning between Libyan hospitals and European hospitals, also on Libyan soil, where all those Africans, and from North Africa in particular, who wants to be treated medically in Europe, they can receive this medical treatment in European hospitals on Libyan soil. This is a developmental solution. This is a grassroots solution. This is the solution which prevents potential terrorism in the long run. But what we are doing now, this Coast Guard solution, this borders concern solution, you are pushing those poor people into some extreme measures. I don't want to be exaggerating. People today might be coming seeking jobs, seeking better way of life, but they are pushed back. They will be coming again, but in that case, they will be coming seeking lives, not looking for a better way of life. So this is what I call a preventive strategic approach, that we think strategically for the sake of more flourishing economy, sustainable growth in our economy in Europe. 3, finding a real, drastic strategic solutions for the question of what's called or labeled illegal immigration. Libya today, whether we like it or not, it's a very vast country. It's the 3rd largest Arab country. I mean, just the coast is almost 1,900 kilometers. It's the longest coast in North Africa. We have 4,300 kilometers terrain borders with Tunis, with Algeria, with Mali, with Chad, with Sudan, with Niger, with Egypt. So it's a huge country, but without any state. First priority, if we want to protect our national interests as Europeans, bring the state back to Libya. Without that, Libya will continue to be like a fireball, which might move in any direction. And as the professor said in the introduction, I remember October 2011, just 2 days before I resigned my post as a prime minister at that time, I was pleading here, crying, please don't leave Libya. Help us rebuild our institutions. We became a stateless society. We are different from Egypt and Tunisia. Unfortunately, nobody listened. I was told mission was accomplished. It's easy to destroy a country, but the hardest part is to rebuild it. And unfortunately, it turned out when some governments of the international community intervened militarily in Libya in 2011, it turned out that they intervened not for the sake of protecting civilian lives, as the Security Council resolution stipulated at that time, but it turned out, unfortunately, they wanted to settle some scores with Gaddafi. Today, what's taking place in Libya, my friend Muhammad Farhad there was reminding me today of what's taking place in Tawarga. It's a whole town which was displaced. And by the way, they are black skin. Nobody talks about them in the media. Nobody. As if the displaced, the Libyan refugees who are displaced not only from their own towns, even from their own country. Libyans who are living in Egypt, living in Tunisia, all over the place. Those are also refugees. But, and strangely enough, lately, some of the immigrants who are heading toward Europe, heading north, some of them turned out to be Libyans, which means Libya is not the place even for its own citizens. Why should we force those Africans to stay in it? So I think, to conclude, I would like to say that revisiting the European Union policy vis-à-vis the issue of immigration is in place. It's very much needed, because this course of action that we are moving in right now, it's not only that going to make things worse, it might yield more terrorists in the continent, especially with those news coming out in the last 2-3 months that some elements of Boko Haram started to be in Libya, some elements of Al-Shabaab in Somal starts to be in Libya. These are a very lethal, vicious terrorist groups that started operating in Libyan soil, penetrating inside those immigrants. What we are doing now is not only going to make things worse, no, it's going to produce more terrorists, and this is the thing that definitely we don't want. Thank you for listening.